Good evening. This is the Board of Education workshop meeting. It is Wednesday, April 29th, 2020, at 7 p.m. I would like to call the meeting to order. The first order of business is a COVID-19 update. So I'm going to turn to Dr. Freeman and the Guilford Public Schools Administration for their report.
Thank you very much, Dr. Balistraci. I imagine that this might be a bit more of a conversation than a report, but there are a few items that I do want to make sure that we touch base on. Initially, I do want to let the board know, make the board aware, and I believe I may have mentioned this before, but in addition to preparations around distance learning, conversations around grading, conversations around policy, I do want the board to know that we have also begun meetings with our crisis team. District-wide, we have pulled together members of our support teams, school counselors, school social workers, school psychologists, as well as members of our administrative team and our school nursing staff, to begin talking about how we will support each other, ourselves, our students, their families, should the COVID crisis become more disruptive than simply closing our schools. It's my understanding that in New York City, more than 19 teachers have lost their lives to COVID-19. We have lost family members in this community before. We have lost students. We have lost staff members. We have never had to deal with those events and support our students without being able to have them with us and in front of us. And so we've begun discussing how we will respond as a school system, what kinds of supports we will put in place, and how we will be there to support our students should those kinds of losses affect us here in Guilford. Obviously, we're hopeful that that never occurs, but we also know that it's only responsible to begin those conversations and to begin that planning when it is theoretical and before it becomes immediate and necessary. So I do want you to know that we've begun those conversations. Mike Regan is in the meeting today. He's a member of that group who's been part of that initial conversation and the smaller conversations that are happening around the district. We do have crisis plans. We do have response plans in place. And again, we're just modifying those or talking about how we would modify those to make them most effective in these kinds of conditions. We have reached out to Guilford Youth and Family Services. We plan on partnering with them should we need to respond in any of those ways.
Dr. Freeman, do we have a member from each school on that team or in that group?
I believe so. I know that there's at least representation from each level. So okay. I know that we have support personnel from the elementary level, then the middle schools and the high school. But I believe we might have somebody from every individual school as well. It's just hard to have a sense of the room in meetings like these. I'm picturing the checkerboard that was in front of me, and I'm trying to remember exactly who was there. I do believe we have from every school, but I know we have at least from every level represented.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
And Tammy Lazat, who is the head of guidance at the high school, will be a significantly important player in that as well. And again, I'll have more updates for you as we continue to meet. It was essentially some initial conversation and then small breakout conversations happening at the building levels. We've also put together some communication vehicles that had not existed in the past. We never had a group email for that group before. They existed in building groupings, but not pulled out centrally. And so we did talk about some structures that we will use to communicate, and any response in this case would be a district-wide response to make sure that we have supports in place.
Does anybody have any questions or comments on that? I do thank you and thank the school system at large for doing this. I think it's so crucial to be prepared. Hopefully, you will not have to put people into action, but so much better to have given this a lot of planning and forethought.
Yep, and so we hope not to have to respond, but we wanted you to know that we're planning to be ready to do our best should we have to.
Terrific.
Next conversation, I think, is a much more positive conversation. I know that we highlighted this a little bit Monday during the policy committee meeting. And I sent you a document earlier this evening. This is a draft of a communication that we plan on sending out to the community at large next week, probably about midweek next week. But we were waiting for guidance to come out from the State Department of Education before making any local decisions about grading. That guidance happened to be issued the Thursday before we went into April break. So as soon as the guidance came out, even though we did have conversations across that week, we lost access to the teachers to be able to pull them into conversations. The State Department of Education has recommended that all school districts use a pass-fail grading system for the fourth quarter, recognizing the difficulties involved in trying to continue to assign traditional grades while the students are not in school with us and in front of us on a regular basis. Concerns about equity, concerns about consistency, and concerns about fairness, quite honestly, continuing that grading system. We considered that recommendation seriously, and we understand the concerns that drove the state to make that recommendation. What we are proposing in the draft that I'm sharing with you tonight is sort of a hybrid. We are suggesting that at the high school level, and I'll work backwards from the high school, we're actually following a model that has been adopted by many universities across the country. What we're proposing at the high school is that, in fact, the default position remain to calculate letter grades. We have talked quite a bit about how we are grading. We have encouraged teachers to reduce the amount of assessment that takes place. We've asked them to reduce the amount of assignments. We've asked them to focus on formative assessment to help them know what they need to do differently and what kids need, rather than summative assessment that judges student performance. We've asked them to look at understanding the situations that our students are in and recognizing that we need to grade differently. But all that being said, teachers are still calculating letter grades based on student performance and student work product. Students at the high school, however, will be given an opportunity course by course through the last day of school to request that any of their classes for the fourth quarter be graded with a pass or incomplete option. Should a student receive a passing grade, it will simply not impact their letter grade for the year. So if a student has received 3 A's for the first, second, and third marking quarter and selects to receive a passing grade for the fourth marking quarter, then 3 A's would be averaged and that student would receive an A for the year in that course. Those decisions can be made individually course by course, and they will need to be made by the last day of school. Students and parents are being asked to contact this child's assigned school counselor to have a decision about making that choice. In the absence of the request, then we would continue to assign letter grades as we currently do. Students receiving an incomplete, seniors would have until July 1st to complete any outstanding work and change an incomplete to a grade of pass. And all other students other than graduating seniors will have until the end of the first quarter next school year to complete any outstanding assignments and have an I changed into a passing grade. We believe that this is the most flexible. We believe that it's the most fair. We actually believe that it essentially is a hold harmless option to the way that we provide grades. We want to provide grades that helps to mitigate the anxiety that this situation is causing for children and for families. We don't want our grading system to be in any way something that fuels the fires of anxiety and stress that families and students are feeling right now. And we believe that a sense of control goes a long way to doing that. So we think that by giving this option and by giving that sense of control, students can place themselves in the best way possible to have this final quarter of this school year not harm them, but actually possibly help them. A student who has seen a performance of B in all 3 of the first quarters, but is doing well and is earning an A in this fourth quarter, as unusual as it is, isn't forced to accept a passing grade. That student can still accept the letter grade, see the A on this fourth quarter, and actually see that work this quarter under these unusual circumstances could have improved that average for the year. So we just feel that that is the best option. and a number of other school districts around the state that we know of are beginning to move in the direction of that option as well. I know that Old Lyme is offering a similar structure. I know that Simsbury and Avon are offering a similar structure. HK, where I live, is offering a similar structure. And just the other day, the superintendent from Waterford reached out to me and asked to see the same draft that I've shared with you. They're considering moving. So I think you'll see a number of districts around the state choosing this option. I do know that some of the largest, most populous districts in the state are moving towards the universal pass-fail option. And I do know of 1 or 2 districts that are maintaining strict and only letter grading. I think in Guilford, we've worked long and hard to find compromises that benefit our students, and we believe this is one of those. Just to quickly move through the other 3 grade levels then, at the middle grades, we are shifting to a full pass or incomplete option. We don't calculate class rank, we don't calculate GPA, while students are letter graded at those 2 levels, Baldwin and Adams. They don't have the formal transcript that the high school students have. At those 2 grades, we are shifting towards pass or incompletes at both of those levels, 5 through 8. All students will have until the end of the first quarter next year to complete any outstanding work and have I's changed into passing grades. Like at the high school, those students will still receive a letter grade for the year, and that will be calculated based on the performance of the first 3 quarters. This last quarter will have no impact on that. And again, we've talked with our teachers about emphasizing learning and progress over this last quarter and de-emphasizing grading over this last quarter. The one exception to that is students at Adams who are taking high school level courses. There are some students who take algebra or take geometry at Adams. Those students will have the option to choose a letter grade or pass fail, as any other high school student has the option of choosing. At the elementary grades, we don't assign letter grades. We give progress reports, and they are progress reports that are communicated through notations of achieving or progressing or needing more time to reach a given standard. We will continue to report using those 3 indicators, but rather than reporting on a whole raft of approximately 30 different discrete standards, we are going to distill the standards down to a smaller number of higher level power standards, and we will continue to report out to parents that your child has achieved this grade level standard or is progressing towards this standard or needs more time to reach this standard. And we're communicating that to the parents, trying to help everybody recognize that those 3 indicators currently are going to be much more about the circumstances in this very unusual end to our school year than about a child's ability or performance or potential. It shouldn't be surprising or upsetting to somebody to hear that your child might need more time to reach a grade level standard, because all of our children have missed time this year. So we know that some parents will read those indicators as grades. We're trying to encourage them not to read them as grades, to read them as notes of progress, and know that we have next year and the year after and the year after that ahead of us to help any student who needs to be caught up in those ways. This communication is a very high level communication that will go out from Dr. Crystal and myself. In each building, principals are preparing more detailed communications about what exactly that grading looks like. And we know that teachers are going to be hit with questions. It's easy to lay this out quickly to all of you at this very high level, but when we roll this out to 3,300 children and their parents, there will be specific questions about what does this mean for my child in this class. So we do know that this will generate conversation when it goes out. But again, we think that it is meeting the most needs possible in a situation where we're forced to make compromises. So again, we've been working on this. We were sort of working on it before the state guidance came out. We really dug in after we got that guidance to try to do what we thought was most appropriate. Dr. Crystal has done a lot of research looking at what's happening nationally and what some of the best thinkers around grades believe. And we're really just sort of happy with where we've landed, but I'm happy to also take questions or explain further.
Dr. Freeman, Mrs. Peck had a question here she wrote into the chat. Will each student have to declare one way or the other? How will the district be sure each student gets the message and doesn't inadvertently receive a letter grade when in fact he or she would have preferred a pass
Yep.
fail?
So we are communicating out that the default will be to continue to receive the letter grades. So the impetus is on the individual student and family. So this communication will go out from Dr. Crystal and from myself to every family in the school district through our mailing system. The high school will be following up individually with communications that come out from the administration at the high school. And then the school counselors are going to be very involved in this. So we really want the school counselors actually looking at it and advising students. So I would think that if there is a child who was doing well and we've seen a drop off in this fourth quarter, but haven't had a request, that our counselors are going to be proactively reaching out and saying, Paul, your grades this quarter aren't what they have been. One, are you okay? Right? Is there anything that we need to know? Is there anything that we can be doing to support you? And two, you should really be thinking about the pass or incomplete option. Is that something? So we really expect it to be conversational. And the flip side is if a parent quickly picks up the phone and says, look, it's just been tough around here. I want pass incomplete for all of my courses. We expect that our counselors will look carefully and say, well, you know what? Paul actually did really well in this class. So it may have been a tough quarter, but a letter grade in English might be a better choice for him. That would actually help him rather than just taking passes. So we expect it to be very interactive and to be a very thoughtful decision. But technically, if there's no communication from the family to us, then we would issue letter grades.
And
Go ahead.
Sorry, Dr. Freeman, piggybacking on that question a little bit, when will, you said the last day of school, they'll be able to make that decision. Will they know the letter grade before making the decision? So is it a decision that can be made when they know what the best decision to be made is?
Yes. Yep. We're not keeping anything. This is transparent. We're not hiding anything and asking them to guess what's the bet, right? So they've got access to the Power School system that which is an electronic grade book that they have the ability to look into. They have access to Power School and they have access to their teachers, right? I would actually think that the students are talking to their teachers, determining, right? They should, again, we're not making them make this decision in the dark. I should be able to talk to my algebra teacher and know what the best choice for me is going to be, because most of the grades will be in Power School, but oftentimes that last report you wrote or that last quiz you took might not be in there yet. So they should be talking to their teachers and they should be able to make a thoughtful and the best decision that they can make.
Dr. Freeman, you mentioned the counselors potentially reaching out. I'm wondering if it makes sense as part of this letter, or whether this would come out more directly from the high school itself, to encourage students interested in talking to their counselor to know that that is an option. But maybe that is not part of this letter and part of a more focused high school letter.
I think you're right. That's the kind of communication that would come from Mr. Masenti directly to the students, that you've seen the superintendent's letter. This is how it's going to work. You should be reaching out to your teachers and counselors and having those conversations now. And then again, right, our teachers and counselors at the high school don't sit back with folded arms waiting for students who need help to approach them. We will reach out and we will encourage the students who need to be prompted to make that kind of request as well.
And I want to provide Mrs. Peckett a follow-up question. I understand that the state has discussed pass with distinction as an option as well. I understand we are not going to take this option. Can you explain, please?
Yes. So, right, there are some districts that are moving towards pass with distinction, pass, nearly pass, or fail. And when you get down to 4 levels, you're really just providing letter grades. And so we talked quite a bit about the option of dropping letter grades completely and moving to pass with distinction, or incomplete. That was the runner-up position. We ultimately landed where we did because I do worry about a student who was struggling early in the year and was beginning to turn things around in the third quarter, and then loses the ability, even in that case, a pass with distinction in the way that I understand it and the way that I'm seeing it be applied in most cases doesn't do anything to change the letter grade that gets reported at the end of the year. A pass and a pass with distinction numerically have the same value. It communicates that you did really well, but we thought that allowing the students to choose the letter grade and impact that year-long average, again, gives them a sense of control and empowers them to a degree to make that decision. And if you choose a pass or an incomplete, it really is just a recognition that you checked in, you did the work, and teachers are still providing commentary, especially at the middle and elementary level. They will receive narratives that help to explain what happened during that time. But again, we thought, I know that in communities that are similar to Guilford and Durg, A and B communities, taking away letter grading completely is going to be challenging for some students and particularly for some parents. We have already received communications while we've been going through the conversation, and some of them have said, this is a really difficult time. I hope you go to the pass-fail option because students can't be graded fairly under these conditions. We've received some other communications that have said, my child's working really hard. My child is spending more time now than she did when school was in session. She's learning how to do this from a distance. She's working 12 hours a day. I hope that she has the opportunity to earn her A because she deserves it. And if other students aren't putting in that time, then I don't want everybody to get the same passing grade. This decision will be a snow day decision. If we choose just letter grades, we leave some people out in the cold. If we choose just pass fail, even with distinction, I think we leave some people unserved. It's a hybrid, we know it, but we still think that it is the best decision. We talked a lot about that distinction grade.
Do others have questions, comments, thoughts?
I'll just share that I think you made the right decision. I think this is a really good way to go, especially at the high school level.
We really appreciate that. Thank you.
I just had a question that's come via other parents that I'm friends with, and it may not speak to grades, but it's kind of about assessment. What are the thoughts about the sixth graders going to seventh graders in terms of the math assessment and placement? Are we just going to wait on that and base it on, because usually they have to go through a whole rigor of testing and assessment to kind of be put forward to a recommended math class?
That's been simmering on the back burner, and now that we've put this overall grading piece to bed, now that's moving right up to the front burner. We have had conversations with Mr. Regan. We've talked about that. For what it's worth, the options that have been discussed, we've discussed whether or not it makes sense to have students move into an accelerated program at all next year. Remember, we don't offer advanced math classes at Adams Middle School. We offer accelerated. It's the same program. Everybody gets the same algebra. There's not a good algebra and a really good algebra. Everybody gets the same algebra. What has happened is that some students don't take it until 9th grade. Some students take it in 8th, many, and some students take it in 7th. We've really talked about whether or not it is right or sound to expect students to be able to be accelerated into algebra for their 7th grade when when they could likely end up missing 14 weeks of 6th grade. That's one option. Another option is to continue to make an accelerated group based on information we had going in, but thinking very carefully about how do those decisions get made with the absence of a 4th quarter grade, with the absence of some other assessments that we may have given. So we're looking at it. We don't have an answer yet, but yes, we're thinking
I'm just hearing a lot of, I'm getting all the questions, and that's just one that seems to be repeating.
And I think as soon as this communication goes out, you're going to get more. As soon as the answer about overall grading goes out, then that question is going to bubble up more quickly. I did skip one detail that I ran over. We have been in touch with the organizations we partner with for IB instruction, AP instruction, and ECE, which is early college credit courses. We partner with College Board, with the International Baccalaureate Association, and with UConn in all of those cases. and a passing grade is perfectly acceptable in the fourth quarter in any of those three conditions. It doesn't disadvantage any of our students who are participating in IB or AP or ECE courses. We've also collaboratively with some neighbors, we've reached out to a number of different universities, and all of the admissions offices are telling us that any student who selects a passing grade for the fourth quarter of 1920 will not be disadvantaged or harmed in any selection process. And that doesn't matter if you're a senior being looked at now, or if you're a freshman 3 years from now, when your transcript lands on an admissions officer's desk. We've got over 50 different universities that have assured us that that's not going to be held against any student who makes that choice. And so we feel that, again, the decision wasn't made quickly. We looked into as many of the strings that we needed to be worried about and made sure that it fit with the courses our students are taking and the way that they will be viewed when it comes time to look at college admissions. The time frame on this is that the principals received this draft. The principals were involved in creating this draft, but as we reached the final, what we think is the final version of this, they received it on Monday. They know that we're discussing it here with you. And again, we plan on releasing it to the community around Tuesday or Wednesday of next week, because we want the principals to have their follow-up communications essentially drafted, ready to talk with teachers, ready to field the questions that come from the community, ready to respond, Moira, to the follow-on questions that this is going to open up, all of those things. This is going to begin conversations for elementary principals about teacher selection and class choice, and what teacher their child will have next year, because getting a final report for this year is going to lead everybody to start thinking about next year, and we want them to be ready to be able to respond to those questions. We do appreciate your support for this. There was a lot of thought that went into this decision, so thank you very much for that.
Dr. Freeman, I have one follow-up question, and it may be that this is being discussed and handled already, but I'm also looking at this letter and again, understanding that something will come out from the schools directly. But I'm, as you've spoken, you have mentioned if students want or if parents want. Can I assume, or I guess it's a question that a high school student is going to be responsible for contacting their teacher or their grade level? I mean, at what point is this much like it would happen if we were in the school building? This is a student taking responsibility for making this contact and not a parent doing that. Is my question clear? I'm not sure my question is clear.
Yeah, the communications will all go out to the guardian of, right? Very few of our students are 18 or older, and so the communications will be, I keep saying the parent, I keep saying the student and the family, or the student and the parent. We very much expect that this is going to be a discussion at home as much as it is in the schools. If a student approaches a counselor and asks to have the pass-fail grading option, I am going to expect that parents are involved in that conversation.
And I guess my question was actually in the reverse. If a guidance counselor hears from a parent of a junior, is there an expectation that the junior is involved in that conversation?
Yes, probably less rigid, but yes, that expectation should be there. Will we sometimes do what a parent asks us to? And again, it's going to be harder now to check in with that student.
No, I understand.
But yes, our school counselors are pretty practiced at having conversations where strong-willed 17-year-olds want to do something that their parents might not necessarily agree with, and navigating that relationship.
Okay.
Some of those 17-year-olds have grown up in my house, and guidance counselors have been very helpful in those relationships.
Any other questions on this topic, or otherwise we can go to the next agenda item?
Would it be okay to do these slightly out of order? I think if we do budget next, because then it seems like most of the rest of the conversation moves into and stays with policy.
I think that's fine if others agree. I'm seeing lots of head nods.
Yeah, and I don't know if this will take long because I think most board members were there Monday night. I think almost everybody was there, at least for most of the conversation Monday evening. But on Monday evening, the Board of Finance met to discuss both the town and school operating budgets in light of the changing situation around COVID-19 itself and the executive order that moved the responsibility for final approval of this budget from a townwide referendum to the Board of Finance. I do want to say that I think the Board of Finance spent a lot of time thinking very carefully about that increased responsibility that they took on this year. They had already approved our budget, and now they needed to finally approve the budget, knowing that things had changed. They spent 3 weeks talking about this. Each of the meeting across those 3 weeks was a minimum of 2 hours long, I think. I think most were longer than that, more like 2.5 hours. And they really worked to solicit community input. So while we didn't have 3,000 voters come out and cast ballots at the ballot box, we did receive, or they did receive, more communication and comments on this budget than they have ever received in the past. And broadly speaking, I believe they received in the ballpark of 175 communications about the budget. I believe that Mr. Ale summarized and said about 22 of those communications really advocated for reducing the budgets and reducing them significantly. And if not bringing the budgets down to a solid zero, at least bringing the tax increase down to a solid zero. So that was about 22 out of about 175 communications. Approximately 135 of those communications advocated for maintaining the budgets as they are currently written, recognizing that next year is going to be a rebuilding year for the entire town, but specifically for the schools. I believe about 125 of the 135 specifically named the school budget and asked not to have the school's budget reduced, recognizing that there will be a number of unknowns as we go into the next year. There were a few people who commented publicly. Additionally, I heard one of the public comments ask for an increase in the school's budget based on the same logic that we don't know what next year is going to be like and we need to be ready to serve our kids, and therefore our budget should be increased. And I heard the president of the teachers union defend the budget and specifically call out the importance of coaches in next year's budget, that teachers will be coming back to classrooms that will be unlike the classrooms we left. Students will be coming back and will have a variety of needs, and will, if differentiation was a challenge every single day of our lives, it's going to be a greater challenge as we try to bring kids back into this system. And heard her specifically talk about the importance of coaching and professional support for teachers as we do that. The Board of Finance had a vigorous conversation over 3 meetings. I very much appreciated the amount that they allowed Dr. Balistraci and Mrs. Trudeau and me to participate. They did allow us to be part of those conversations. They had questions for us, but they were also very gracious in allowing Katie and I both to mount soapboxes periodically. And ultimately, they did reduce our budget. They reduced our budget by $200,000, which is approximately 0.3%. So our 1.94% increase, I believe, has been reduced to a 1.63% increase with that adjustment. They also likewise adjusted the town budget down by $100,000. What was interesting is they then stopped. They stopped short of then setting a mill rate. They will come back. They will talk one more time. And it sounds like there is interest in taking a similar number. They reduced the operating budgets by a combined $300,000. It sounds like they are entertaining taking a similar number from the undesignated surplus fund, so that the overall budget is reduced by more than $300,000, around 450 or 500, I think is what they were discussing, which would then bring the mill rate down significantly. I don't think it'll bring it down to a zero, but it will bring it down to a much smaller increase than they were looking at. So while the town total budget isn't complete, the operational budgets are done, the mill rate still needs to be set, and any change to the, or any withdrawal from the surplus account needs to be finalized. The good news is that we know that we have a budget. We know what our budget will be for next year. That is now fixed. We are working in-house to identify recommendations for you, areas where we think we can make that $200,000 reduction. And we have begun looking at next year already. We've looked at the vacancies that are now in place. We can begin planning and strategizing for how to hire and how to fill those vacancies. We can begin looking at staffing decisions that need to be made, all of which would have been on hold if we were still waiting for a final budget figure. So it is, I think, overall good news. In the first of those 3 meetings, we were looking at a number that could have been as great as $980,000 of reduction. That was the first number that got floated in the first evening's conversation. In that evening, there were no letters supporting our budgets. After they talked about that publicly, the first 80 came in supporting our budgets. I think $200,000 is reasonable. We will work hard to minimize impact to programming, to staffing, to anything that touches the students and their experience next year. You know that that's hard when you've brought in a bare bones budget already. $200,000 is still a lot of money, but we're working on it, and we'll have recommendations for you by your May meeting. The first place we're looking, we want you to know, is that we've brought in our medical advisor, and we're looking very carefully at those numbers. Sometimes we find benefit there because we build our budget so early that we're only working on medical projections that go up until November. Now we can look at medical numbers that go all the way up to April. So we'll take a look there. We're looking wherever we can. Obviously, we're looking at capital. Site improvements is an area that we're going to look hard at, but we'll have some recommendations for you to choose from and among when we see you in May. Katie, you suffered through all of those as well. Is there anything that I failed to?
No, just a couple comments. I think with the 2 reductions that were decided on Monday night, if I heard correctly, that brings the mill rate to 1.13. That is before the Board of Finance determine what from the unassigned fund balance might be used additionally. Again, I think most of you are on the call, but we were asked, Mrs. Trudeau was asked, and the Board of Selectmen were asked to provide an estimate of kind of a surplus amount that we expect might be available on June 30th of this year. And given the amount that Linda indicated, which was 200 to 250, and what the town indicated was a 275. I think I'm saying that correctly. And again, it was made clear by both parties that these were truly estimates, that it's very hard under these circumstances to know that for sure, that the Board of Finance, or at least several members, indicated that they thought that some of those monies would be used to add to or help reduce the mill rate for next year. And I think the only other thing I'll mention is there was some back and forth about using unassigned fund balance at all. I think people were comfortable using surplus that would have gone into the unassigned fund balance. And there was a recognition by several Board of Finance members that these circumstances, COVID-19 impacts going into next year and throughout next year, and what that might do to revenue means that the Board of Finance may find themselves using more of that unassigned fund balance should the schools or the town have emergency or unexpected expenses as we kind of recover from this impact and have to do whatever we have to do to make the school system or the town whole moving forward.
Yeah, I think there was a legitimate concern expressed that next year's budget is going to be challenging. Right, next year, where we may have the medical portions of this behind us, but the aid stops flowing in. I mean, right now we have people who may be unemployed, but they're receiving the unemployment enhancement. Next year, and I think a legitimate concern about what our state aid will look like
That's
next
right.
year. Will grants be reduced? Will we lose monies on the state side as the state tries to begin some kind of fiscal recovery? So I think it's wise not to go really deep into the surplus account. But to your number, Katie, I think the suggestion was with as little as $150,000 or $200,000 from
Right.
surplus, that tax increase could then go from just above 1% to 1% flat or just below 1%.
Right.
And I think there may be a move in that direction. But again, we know that our budget is set. It leaves us with a budget that sits just below $61 million. It leaves our annual increase at less than $1 million rather than slightly over $1 million. And I believe it leaves us with a percent increase of 1.63. But again, we'll have all of that finalized for you, as well as recommendations for any adjustment to any line items to absorb that reduction. I came away thinking that $200,000 was a responsible, reasonable decision, and that they had listened to us as well as to the people who had communicated through emails and public comments.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
It was unclear listening to the meeting as to whether the decision on the bond issues was going to necessitate a referendum, or whether the Board of Finance had the authority to approve those. And I know that the Standing Building Committee is very, very antsy that we need to get those, at least the school part, approved, because we need to mobilize. We can't sign contracts for this coming summer until we know we have the funding, and the contractors therefore can't order the long lead time equipment until we give them a signed contract. And every time we have a Board of Finance meeting, we think we're going to get this approved, and it doesn't seem to happen. So,
oh, it's a good question. Thank you for. We currently still sit at a bond request of 2.6%, and while the operating budgets were finalized, there was no action taken on the bonds. And the bonds have been teased out and treated differently by executive order than the operational budgets were. So my understanding of the executive order is that the town may now choose to have this bond approved at a referendum that would have to receive local health authority approval as safe. Now, it's my understanding that Vernon just yesterday had a referendum and nobody was allowed to get out of their car. It was a drive-through referendum. Or it is my understanding that the Board of Finance or the Board of Selectmen can similarly authorize the Board of Finance to make a decision on the bond request in the same way that they cast 7 votes on the operational budgets. So we didn't push to have that approved Monday night, Ted, because we needed to go back and review some of the bids. The bids that came in on the Baldwin project were surprising. We have had to go back and revise those, and we've had to clarify the scope of those bids. We originally bid a portion of the building, and all the bidders came back having bid on the entire building. There was a 1990s wing that we hadn't, so we needed them to adjust their bids to get back within the range that we had budgeted. We now have the bond. Finalized. We know that our numbers are good, and we will now bring it to the Board of Finance, ask for their approval, and then they will need to decide how they choose to approve that. They could send it to referendum. And actually, this is the Board of Selectmen's decision. The Board of Selectmen can choose to send it to referendum, and it would be a single item vote. It wouldn't be the budgets it would just be this. Or they could choose to ask the Board of Finance for their approval. I plan on asking for them to address that on or before May 5th, which is the timeline they have to make the decision about mill rate. So I think we'll have a decision by May 5 on that bond. The bond, remember, includes the HVAC at Baldwin, which is now going to have an additional phase tacked on. We won't finish it this summer. We'll do the main section and finish it next summer, and it will still include the HVAC at Lakes, but it'll be up to the Board of Selectmen how to approve it, and then it will. Now, my sense on Monday night was that if the Board of Finance votes, I believe that this bond will move forward. There was some passionate support for it voiced at that meeting. I would be less confident if it went to a townwide referendum, just because it's a lot of money in a tough time. And so we'll see what the Board of Selectmen choose to do with it. But we will have an answer one way or the other, I expect, no later than May 5.
And I do think my understanding or interpretation towards the end of that meeting is that with the executive order that addresses this, there was some consideration, as Dr. Freeman is suggesting, that it could be a Board of Finance vote if it is more than 1% of the overall budget, which is reflective of over 1% of the overall budget, which it is, and also if it would have substantial financial impacts, or was that if it was not
Health and
done,
safety.
Right, or there was a health and safety issue. And so I believe what it was happening after that meeting was that Mr. Hoey was checking with our legal counsel in town to
Correct.
make sure that that was a correct interpretation of the executive order, and then determine whether the Board of Finance would in fact take up the bonding issue as their own body and vote on it. I didn't, if I were to be asked after that meeting, I didn't hear a discussion about would we set up a referendum. What I heard was, can we consider this as a Board of Finance vote? Let's check with legal.
Yep.
Thank you.
So
Any
then-
other questions? Sorry, any
Nope.
other questions on the budget update at this point?
I was watching the finance meeting, and I understand their rationale. I think they made a penny wise and pound foolish decision on the budget. I think they did it for legitimate and obvious political reasons, symbolic, but they didn't take into consideration the virtual guarantee that this town and this school system will see less money, will see less revenue and greater expenses next year, which means we've just decreased our cushion almost automatically by $200,000 on a budget that was already cut by the Board of Finance when we went in. So I know we can handle this because we have to, but I'm just saying, I was a little surprised that part of that meeting felt a little too political for me. I'm surprised by that.
We did sort of put the Board of Finance on notice at the end of the meeting, and we reminded them that we felt that it was a thin budget to begin with, and now it's going to be a little bit thinner, and we understand the rationale for that. But we did put them on notice that there are a lot of unknowns next year. We're going to have requests for assessment and for remediation, we know. We're going to have some concerns around special educational costs, and probably in a related way around legal costs. And quite honestly, I've been engaging in conversations around the state about whether when schools reopen, will they reopen completely, or will they open in some kind of staged and staggered and phased process. And so we've begun very preliminarily, but we've begun sketching out what split sessions might look like. What if we open like the restaurants, but we're limited to half of our capacity? And so Mr. Grimm sees his pre-K, K, and first graders in the morning, but then sees his second, third, and fourth graders in the afternoon, which would have a minimum increase of 1/3 to our busing costs if we can use a swing run in the middle. But if we have to reduce loads on the buses and can't even use a swing run, it might double our busing expenses next year. So we did let them know that we, and nobody in Guilford can remember the last time that this ever happened, but we did let them know that there might be a series of circumstances that requires us to come before them asking for a supplemental appropriation next year. Right, there's a lot of unknowns, and we won't be alone in Connecticut facing them. But we did, we're going in with a thin budget. I think it's a responsible budget considering the times, but if it doesn't cover our needs, we may have to go back and ask for more. And I believe the response we got to that was, and that's what the rainy day fund is for, and that we would, and I believe that we would have a Board of Finance that would listen to us should we find ourselves in those kinds of dire straits. It wasn't an uplifting meeting. Yeah, I think it was reasonable and responsible, but it wasn't, you didn't leave feeling uplifted. So the last item that we have for you, it's actually the last conversation. It covers 3 items on the agenda, well, 2 items on the agenda. On Monday evening, the operations committee met, and I believe most of you were in attendance at that meeting as well. And Jason has inventoried all of our policies in light of all of the executive orders that have been issued, as well as simply the changing conditions that we're experiencing here locally. Now, we've done that with some guidance from both CABE and from Shipman and Goodwin, who has been sending out legal updates through this entire period. Jason put together a very detailed document, which we walked through all together in that meeting on Monday evening, talking about policy by policy, how it was being impacted, why it was being impacted, whether or not it was a local concern or an executive order that was impacting it. And what we brought for you tonight, which Terry shared with you, I think earlier today or tomorrow, is just the boiled down 4 recommendations that we're making to you. So there's 4 suggestions that we're bringing to you tonight. Then we would be asking that you take action on all or some of them. We think that 1 and 2 are important and definitely need to be considered. We think that 3 and 4 are less urgent, but there are items that you might want to consider. In any case, if we are to take action on these tonight, then each recommendation would require 2 acts. You would first need to waive your bylaw of 30 days before making any policy change. Usually we bring it to you in one meeting where you receive it and you don't act on it until 30 days later. We would need to waive that expectation and then ask you to act on them. And again, I want to thank Jason, because if you, different than the document that we showed you Monday night, you'll see that item number 1 and item number 2 now work as sort of standalone items and take into account the feedback that we received from all of you on Monday evening to make them essentially complete motions in the way that they're written for us to provide to you. Again, just want you to know that all of this work has been done closely with CAPS, closely with Shipman and Goodwin, who has been working through CAPS with Connecticut school districts all across the state, and then with CABE. So none of these are recommendations that are coming off the cuff from us. They've all been recommended, encouraged, discussed, or vetted with any or all of those organizations. And I failed to mention guidance from the SDE as well. They're either impacted by local need, guidance that has come from the commissioner's office, or the executive orders that have come off of the governor's desk. And we've sort of broken them out into sections to make them easier to digest.
Do people have questions about this? So next on our agenda is actually to act on this item or these items. I know we discussed them in great detail on Monday night, but I don't know if anyone has any follow-up questions before it becomes something that this board is asked to act on.
We did go through them in detail. Jason did an exceptional job of word by word going through these things, and the explanations were full. So I'm recommending that we vote on them tonight and that we waive our 30-day rule in order to enable us to do that vote tonight.
I'm in agreement as well.
Agreed.
I
Okay.
would agree as well.
So let's do this officially. What I've heard is a motion from Dr. Hirsch and a second from Mr. Del Ventura to waive the 30-day process. I don't know if we have to do this officially, but it certainly can't hurt to do so. To waive the 30-day process of receipt and then acting on these policies. Any further discussion before we take a vote? All right. All those in favor, say aye, or you know what, I'm sorry, I'm going to do what the Board of Finance did because I think it does help with minutes. I'm just going to quickly identify we have.
Before you do, Katie, may I just ask who seconded that?
Sorry, Mr. Del Ventura.
I
Got it.
second it.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry, John.
So I'm going to just go through a quick roll call by literally the faces I see in the order on the screen here. Mr. Sands, A or nay on that?
Yes.
Mrs. Rader,
Yes.
Mrs. Peck? Yes, okay. Dr. Hirsch,
Yes.
Mr. Del Ventura,
Yes.
Mr. Galino,
Yes.
Dr. Best,
Yes.
Mrs. Sullivan?
Yes.
Okay, and I say yes. So we have agreed to waive that 30-day waiting period. So then the next
We
is,
should probably do these number by number because we've sort of batched them. So if we could do 1, 2, and then 3 and 4. Yep.
okay, so one, I'm sorry, Dr. Freeman, 1 separately, 2 separately, and then 3 and 4. Okay.
Yeah.
So is there a motion to approve the recommendation made by the policy committee? Number 1, I'm going to just briefly read it. Approve inclusively and until such time as schools reopen to in-person schooling, recommended changes to the following policies and regulations that pertain to the governor's executive orders and federal mandates. Number 1138, number 4114, number 4172/4272, number 6110, number 6310, number 9410, number 9414, number 9418, and number 9422. Only the provisions provided in the executive orders and mandates will supersede existing policy language. All other provisions in policy regulations will remain unchanged. Is there a motion to approve this recommendation from the policy committee?
So moved.
So moved.
Okay, I see Mrs. Sullivan moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
Dr. Hirsch second. All in favor, Dr. Sands, aye or nay? Sorry, Mr. Sands, aye. Mrs.
Aye.
Rader,
Aye.
Mrs. Peck? Aye. Dr. Hirsch,
Aye.
Mr. Del Ventura,
Aye.
Mr. Galino,
Aye.
Dr. Best,
Aye.
Mrs. Sullivan,
Aye.
and I am aye as well. So that motion passes. The second recommendation from the policy committee to approve inclusively and until such time as schools reopen to in-person schooling, the recommended changes to the following policies and regulations that pertain to the Guilford Board of Education policies and regulations. Number 1346, number 3718, number 4118, number 4137, number 5118, number 5122, number 5218, number 6340, number 6411, number 6426, number 6438, and number 9322. And those
Probably
are
say with
identified.
changes as detailed. Yeah.
I
Changes as
absolutely
identified.
believe it. Well, yes, I will not keep going. Right.
We'll
So
enter it in
these
the
are the
minutes
changes.
completely.
And they are noted here in the recommendation. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Valentura, is there a second?
Second.
Dr. Best, Any further discussion? Mrs. Peck? Do you have a question?
She's writing it.
Typing.
She's
You're
typing.
muted. Okay.
No, she's typing. Can we discuss attendance?
So the state will only be counting physical attendance up until March 12th, the date that we have stopped physically attending. We have taken a position around attendance where we are asking our teachers to monitor student engagement. And so we don't have goalposts, we don't have 7:30 to 2:20 anymore. But as long as teachers are reporting that their students are touching base, keeping up, participating, dropping into conversations or not, if we notice that students are not engaged, we're reaching out to them. Teachers and school counselors and administrators have reached out in some places, but the state is only counting attendance up until March 12th, and all guidelines around how to calculate attendance, notice attendance, truancy, or any of those pieces have all been dropped. And so the exceptions that we're making here are to all of the way we mark tardiness, the way we mark cutting a class. We're just not counting things that way anymore. And so it would more be impacted, or it would more be recognized in that grade of incomplete than it would by how we count attendance. But all of that is in alignment with permissions or guidance that we've received from the State Department of Ed. Did that answer mostly what you were?
Yes.
You're welcome.
All right.
It's hard to do attendance when school is electronic and at home.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, so we have a motion and a second. We'll now take a vote. Mr. Sands?
Aye.
Mrs. Rader?
Aye.
Mrs. Peck? Aye. Dr. Hirsch?
Yes.
Mr. Del Ventura?
Yes.
Mr. Galino?
Yes.
Dr. Best?
Aye.
Mrs. Sullivan?
Yes.
And I, Dr. Ballas Tracy, am an aye as well. All right, and then we are going to bundle these last two. I will read them. In consultation with the Board of Education Chair, and until such time as schools reopen to in-person schooling, approve authorizing the superintendent to approve bids per policy number 3314 and waive the bidding process for purchases needed should an emergent situation arise, and if it is not possible to convene a quorum of the board. And number 4, in consultation with the Board of Education Chair, and until such time as schools reopen to in-person schooling, approve authorizing the superintendent to act on behalf of the Board of Education in relation to waiving or suspending any policy or regulation of the board should an emergent situation arise and it is not possible to convene a quorum of the board.
I'll tell you again that we have not found a situation in these first 7 weeks where this has been necessary. I don't feel that either one of these is urgent. I think if there was one that was more important than the other, it would be number 4. And as I've been trying to think of possible situations, I could think of possible personnel or employment situations where something needed to occur. Again, it would only be done if we couldn't convene a quorum in a reasonable amount of time, and it would only be done after touching base with Dr. Ballas Tracy. Both of these have been recommended to us from outside counsel. I'm not particularly invested in either one, but we've been told it's prudent to bring these to your attention and ask for an approval.
Before I ask for a motion, is there anyone who is concerned about voting on these together? Okay. Is there a motion to approve this recommendation?
So moved.
So moved.
Dr. Hirsch moved. I heard Amy Sullivan. Is that a second? Mrs. Sullivan? Second. Any further comment, questions, discussion?
I have a quick question I just want to bring forward. When it states in-person schooling, does that include if we were to do stagger the students that come September? Is that considered in-person schooling at that point as
Yeah.
well? Would that?
In my definition of it, that would be yes. Even if we return partially or return, yes, I would think so.
Any other questions?
Could you, I mean, this is a little bit, well, it's not a little bit, it's quite unusual, particularly number 4. Could you outline to us a situation in which we couldn't find 5 members of the Board of Ed to respond to something that had to be done right away? I mean, right now, most of us are under lockdown.
Yeah,
So-
Ted, I hate to even put it out there, but I don't know if I answered it directly or just hinted at it. The only way that I could see something like that occurring would in fact be if illnesses spiked to such a degree that essential services in Connecticut began to collapse. And so right now it wouldn't happen because we've got communication systems, but if all of a sudden telephony and internet went down, that is when I could imagine that I would not be, because right. And so I don't think that's going to happen. I don't feel that this is developing in that way, but when these recommendations were made, that's what we were talking about. And we were thinking about our experiences with physical crises like hurricanes, where we're without communications for 3 or 4 days. Well, what happens in this case if we're without communications for a week or 2? And I do need to make a decision. That's why these are being recommended. And again, I don't see that happening. I don't anticipate that happening, but having a positive vote on this tonight puts this in the pocket until we get back to some semblance of normal, even if it's only a semblance. And then this goes away. It's got a built-in expiration date. But if things do take a turn for the worst rather than the better, we will have this in place.
And I think, and the reminder, I think, is just that our work must be done in public. So it wouldn't be enough to be able to get 5 of us on a phone call. We are a public body and must conduct our business in public. And so that adds a layer of necessary communication of the kind that we are on now. But Mr. Bowden, you had something to add as well.
Yeah, if I can just interject and just say that my impression from CABE on this matter, Ted, was really a protection for the Board of Education in the event that a quorum could not be achieved because you had many members of the Board of Education sick or hospitalized as well. So that was the urgency of a few weeks ago when CABE was putting these recommendations out, I think was to protect the board as well, to empower the superintendent to make a decision in an emergency when the board cannot convene because of illness.
Okay, I understand.
So again, we're going to sort of wrap up on a very uplifting note.
Any other questions or concerns? All right, so we have a first and a second for a vote. Mr. Sands?
Aye.
Mrs. Rader?
Aye.
Mrs. Peck? Aye. Okay. Dr. Hirsch?
Aye.
Mr. Del Ventura?
Aye.
Mr. Galino?
Aye.
Dr. Best?
Aye.
Mrs. Sullivan?
Aye.
And I am an aye as well. Terrific.
Thank you for that. We do appreciate the confidence that communicates. We very much appreciate that. Thank you.
All right. Sorry, I'm trying to get multiple screens going for the agenda here.
I also just wanted to interject, thank you to Jason, because it was a lot of thorough
It was a
work.
lot of work.
You know,
Yeah, thanks.
Dr. Hirsch brought that up, but it was in our committee meeting and then after to prepare all of that. So thank you.
Terrific. So I do believe that brings us to the end of our meeting. Unless Dr. Freeman, there's anything related to the agenda that we've missed or.
The only thing that I'll quickly note, we launched a parent survey today. We are 7 weeks in. If we end up staying out for the whole school year, this marks about the halfway point of where we are. We launched a quick survey. It's open for a week, but I did just want to let you know, I took a peek. It went out earlier today. We've already received 600 responses. Most of it is open-ended. So we're going to have a lot of reading that we're looking at. We asked for things that we could do better. We asked for what's working, what's not working. But there were two questions that I did want to, we wanted to have some that were written as metrics rather than conversations. One of them asked how the experience was being received by the students in your home. And generally, out of 600 responses, 300 of them said well or very well, that the students were responding to this well or very well. 200 were neutral, and only 100 suggested that it was going poorly or really poorly. That was an interesting and slightly surprising. I mean, we knew that we were doing this as quickly as we could, as best as we could. I was almost expecting to have a really level distribution. I was surprised to see that the distribution was, in fact, so strongly slanted towards a positive experience. The other one was asking about workload, and it was asking about, and we made it really simple, right? Is the workload just right, too much, or too little? And like 400 of the first 600 responses have characterized the workload as just right, which was shocking to me. And then the balance was completely equal. The remaining votes were tied for it was way too much or way too little, which we did sort of expect. But again, I think that those are early returns. It's going to be open for a week. The graphics could change dramatically, but I do think it's a testimony to how hard our teachers are working and how responsive they're working to be. In the last few days, I've dropped into about 3 student sessions, an elementary and 2 at the middle level. I'm going to be in an elementary class about 9 o'clock tomorrow. And I just have to say again, I am enormously impressed and proud of the teachers. They're working hard, they're figuring it out, and they're doing whatever it takes to meet the needs of their kids right now, with really limited tools and opportunities in front of them. And I'm just enormously proud of them, and thought that was a better way to end our meeting than talking about all of you or everybody getting sick. It was a lot of fun to be in those classes the last few days. I drop in, I say hello, I turn my camera off, and then I sit back and I watch really creative instruction taking place in really challenging circumstances. And it's exciting and uplifting to see it happening.
Yeah, Dr. Freeman, I would say as a parent, I'm not surprised by those numbers. I mean, it is evident the effort that's being put forth by both the teachers and the students as well. I think it's an interesting situation to see things, progress on a week by week basis. They're on a roll at this point. At least it feels so in our household, as much as it can be on a roll. Who's reviewing the questionnaire? Who's got their eyes on that, and where does it go from there?
First take is going to be the leadership team. It's going to be the principals and Jason and Anine and I. And we're going to have to figure out, my initial feeling was that I'm going to read every one of these beginning to end. Already I'm a little nervous about whether we have to share that responsibility out. But initially it'll be there, and then we will certainly look to share with you. I don't expect we're going to ask all of you to read every single response. Open-ended is a little bit of a dicey proposition, letting people say whatever they want to say in that comment box. But we will certainly provide you with a report of that. And so we'll share the metric portions with you, and then we'll certainly give you samplings of the challenges and the successes that we're seeing from the open-ended comments.
Great.
There's several articles today in the Times about parents' experiences in schooling, and clearly an appreciation across the country of how tough it is. So in light of that we're doing so well, at least for half the term, is great. But this is now a national experience in a way that people have never had to experience parenthood / teacherhood
Yep.
at the same time.
Paul, I appreciate the clarification. I got the survey today and filled it out right away, and was very appreciative, sort of as a parent, of just you reaching out
Being
for the
asked.
feedback. I'm seeing in the news, and I can also appreciate parents are becoming so frustrated and they're just ending early. You're seeing some early school endings and things like that. So it's nice to hear that it doesn't sound like that's our community response at all, but I do appreciate you reaching out, and really don't envy you reading 600 plus. I know I wrote a lot, so.
It was 600 in the first 4 hours. It's going to be
Right,
open for
right.
6 more days.
And I know I wrote a lot, so I'm sure
Well,
other people had a lot to say too.
And I want to give credit to Bill Grimm. Bill's in the meeting, and Bill was the one who has pushed to say we need to ask parents how it's going. We're getting anecdotal responses, but we need to ask formally. And so, things are happening really, really quickly. And most of the good decisions that are coming out of this team are coming from the team. They're coming from the principals. They're coming from Anine. They're coming from Jason. They're coming from parents who are making really good suggestions. And so Bill deserves credit for that. He was the impetus, and then he was the push to make sure that we got that out and that we heard from parents. And quite honestly, you need to know that we're asking, right? You need to know that we care. And so to John's point, when you ask a question, you then have to be willing to share the answers. We can't ask it and then not tell people what we heard. So we will create a public report of what we hear back to share with you and then with the community.
I guess that
I'll
was
also,
interesting. No, I just had
It
a
will be
quick question.
interesting to see what the results look like based on, adding in what grade your child is into, because I do hear, based on the different schools, particularly the elementary levels, that might be a bit more labor intensive for parents and supporting with the technology and such.
Absolutely. We'll be able to disaggregate by grade level, but I got to tell you, I feel jealous. I feel guilty. I know what parents of elementary kids are going through because I see it from this side of the desk. And I go home to one who's in high school, 2 who are undergrads, and 1 who's in a master's program. And right, they're doing it. I know it's a lot of work for them, but I'm not sitting down organizing lessons. I'm not going home from here and playing teacher again. And so I know it is definitely impacting parents very differently depending on the age of your kids.
Oh, and I would point out there was a section on the survey, as I recall, asking folks, what they need, the resources that they need. I would also point that out as that I appreciated that section as well. And also, I don't know if you want to maybe talk about why that section was included and whether you have, what your plans are for that particular section, which was fairly detailed about what people might need, whether there could be a response to that or how you might respond to that section. There were things about whether people needed computers or, things like that.
It's not intended to be individual. Now, but we do want to know, what were we resourced and stocked up well for? And I hate to say this, but we might not be back in September, or we might be back in September and out again in November. And so we do want to know, what are the things that we could have been prepared up front for, right? Do we need to think differently about parent study guides? And right, and again, I don't know what we don't know, but we wanted to ask the question, and we did really tinker with the wording on that one, because we wanted to make sure that people understood that we want to know what we need to do better moving forward. What could we have resourced you better around? Awful sentence structure, but that's kind of the way that we're trying to ask the question. We want to know, did rolling the Chromebooks out the way we did it work? Do families feel like they needed copies of a textbook at home? One thing that I think is a real positive, but was the website deep enough? If you haven't been to the website, I do want to point out, Lori Hahn is doing an incredible job. Please take a look at the way the website is broken out now. There are There's guidance for how to keep up with the distance learning that's happening, and that's like tech support and how to contact your teacher support. There are sections on just things to do with your kids when they're home that are now beginning to have video galleries of people reading children's books and community resources and links to stuff that we think is quality that they can do. So I just wanted to know what we hit and what we need to do better. There might be a shopping list that we need to put together before we're back out next November, and I'm not sure what that should include right now. And so I'm a little nervous about that one, right? I'm afraid of the things that we didn't resource well, but if you don't ask, people don't always offer, and if you don't hear that kind of feedback, you can't do better if you have to do it again.
No, I think it's an important question. We don't want to make assumptions that folks had what they needed at home, when in fact they didn't have what they needed.
We're also beginning to do work to start planning for what do we have to learn from this to roll forward. Like, we're already beginning to talk about what's going to happen when we get the first big snowstorm next year and I decide to close school for 2 days. I think we're going to have a revolution. I think the parents are going to say, no, you're not closing for 2 days. Send out the distance stuff. So there's some immediate things that we need to think about. And then we also need to say, and what were the really good parts of this that we don't want to lose even once we get back into our classroom? What are the pieces we want to hold on to? I am nervous, and I'm particularly nervous if there's a return on May 21st. But even if there's a return on September 1st, I'm nervous that there's going to be a certain percentage of the population that isn't ready to come back and says, thank you, no, we'll stay here in the distance classroom, everybody else. And right now, we're not structured to do that. Right now, it's a binary choice. We're either in person or we're distance. We don't have a structure in place to say, well, 2 of the 3rd grades want to come back at Cox, but 1 of them would prefer to stay at home. We're not set up to respond to that, but are we going to need to start thinking those questions through? And so those are conversations that are happening sort of a little bit in central office. I haven't shared those in front of Mandy and Mike and Bill, who are all on the call right now, but we're also talking about those at a national level. There's conversations sort of swirling around about whether, right, if there isn't a virus in 12 months or 18 months, if this thing drags on, will parents start sending their schools back to large public schools? Will we end up in this? I mean, so there's huge questions floating around out there that we're still mucking around in. And if we don't ask the parents what we missed, we won't know. So thank you for the encouragement. It's always hard to put yourself out there to be graded, but we've asked to be graded.
Well, I just had a quick question for you. I got the survey and filled it out numerous times for different kids, but I remember you referencing this when you made the choice to keep spring break about like learning fatigue. And I'm starting to also get the feedback from friends, colleagues. I'm on a few different, text groups that in the last 2 weeks, it seems they're seeing a lot of kids kind of hit a wall in terms of the emotional toll this is taking, or the mental toll that's in the fatigue of the repetition. And although I don't think it's so much I think you're right. I think the survey, that doesn't surprise me that it's kind of hitting the right mark. And I'm curious to see the feedback you get and how we can actually be responding to that in real time. I know it's a big task, but I think we're going to see that. If we're still doing this, for another 8-10 weeks, this is going to be asking a lot of these kids. And
7, it's only 7 more weeks.
7, okay. It feels like
it's going to feel like a million.
But I don't know. I've seen this kind of this shift. And I'm curious, and you don't have to have an answer, but I just think the surveys may reveal some of that,
They're really important questions, though. We're starting to have conversations about, I'm starting to have some conversations wondering about if this isn't going to take the novelty and the attachment to screens and push it back for some kids, right? Some kids who wouldn't get off of Fortnite for anything are now starting to say, I want to go back to school, right? So part of me is wondering if this is going to help this generation to move past the addiction to. On the other hand, I'm hearing from, right, we've talked a lot about the wait until 8th grade movement around cell phones. So students, young students who had not discovered the world of social media and Instagram and Snapchat and texting because they didn't have a phone yet, those kids are now discovering it. Those kids are actually using the Chromebooks and the tools that we are providing to stay in touch with their friends even after the class time ends. And I've got some parents who are saying to me, that's fantastic because we're isolating together. My kid is home and hasn't seen her friends for 7 weeks, but she doesn't feel like she hasn't seen her friends for 7 weeks. So I know some people are celebrating the success of this technology, but I've had other people worry, did we just mature a whole generation of kids faster than we wanted to if we had kept them away from a smartphone until they had hit 8th grade? Because those kids are now sort of using this device. So we are beginning to talk about a communication that goes out reminding parents and maybe linking them to some well-done articles. You know, parents can adjust their Chromebook settings. I don't know if any parents have set their Chromebooks to go dead at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but we might want to make start making some of those suggestions so that after 4 p.m., your kids can use the Chromebook for school all day long, but after 4 p.m., they're going to be forced to talk with you and play board games with you and do things. And on the other hand, I know parents are exhausted, right? I know some parents are thrilled to have the video games because they're spending all day long teaching their kids and they can't get out of the house and they're getting no distance from each other. So I'm really, really ambivalent about the good that these devices have provided during this and maybe some of the unanticipated consequences these devices are contributing to during all of this. They're all just really good questions. I just find all of it enormously interesting right now.
And Moira, I have to say, I am in my full-time job working remotely and walked downstairs this morning and looked at my husband and I said, this is getting old. And he said to me, this is feeling a little bit like that movie Groundhog Day. So, you know, my first thought when you mentioned it, and Paul was much more detailed and thoughtful in his answer, but my first approach is, this is getting old, right? Like this is hard. And whether you're my age or whether you're 14 or whether you're 10 or whether you're 8, this is getting hard. So I think this is where we start really.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I see a shift emotionally, and I hear it from friends who have school age students that there's just this kind of, you know, a lot of high school parents like, I'm worried she's spending all day in her room. She seems down. You know, where she used to be excited to see her friends on Classrooms, he doesn't care anymore. I'm hearing a lot of that in the last 2 weeks. It seems like we were on a good trajectory, and then I just think the emotional toll is just revealing itself more. And I think we're all feeling it, but you know, I think they're feeling it and can't understand or express it because they're not mature adults. So
I think you're right. And I'm watching in my house that the college guys are going to be done in a couple of weeks now. And Caleb's got 6 or 7 weeks ahead of him still, right? He's going to be doing this much longer than his brothers are going to be doing this on the college schedule. I do worry that it's going to start to wear thin. And, you know, and the isolation, the electronic component of it. And so I do think the timing of the survey is well timed, and we're going to need to be coaching our teachers about expectations and pressures as we get deeper into this.
And I think the grading communication will help too, because I think if some parents or families are saying it's all become too much, that they'll be able to, you know, at least usher their kids through this as best they can learning wise, but know that there's like this pressure that's been released, you know, in terms of that. I think hopefully it'll help.
I hope so.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, I think we've come to the end of the meeting. I want to acknowledge Dr. Freeman has referenced a couple of people tonight, but we have several of our administrators that have been on the call. I imagine we may have some on the other end of a YouTube feed as well. It's just another opportunity to thank all of you so much for what you're doing. We don't get survey results as Dr. Freeman is reporting by chance. We get them because a lot of people are working really, really hard on your end and your staff's end to make things happen. So, so thank you all. I am going to ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So much better than the Board of Finance.
So moved. So
Second.
moved.
I'm sorry, I missed that. We have a first, I'm sorry, first.
I'm first. So moved.
I got Marva and John first and second.
Wonderful, thank you so much. All in favor? I think we can do a general aye here. All in favor, aye. I'm seeing lots of
Aye.
hands raised. Aye. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Our next meeting is going to be May 11th. And hope everyone stays healthy and safe in the meantime.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.